Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Acknowledging and Rebuilding workshop from Care to Prevent. The outline of what we're going to talk about today is to share the objective of what we're chatting about, to process current events that have been happening. So that's addressing the trauma of the recent events of protesting and of violence, to address the trauma of long-term pain that some communities face, and to acknowledge pain. To share some resources about what is open, how people can access food and medications, how to contribute, and then how to rebuild. The objective of our chat today is to work on processing some of the recent events of these protests against police brutality, to acknowledge ongoing discrimination, racism, and disparities, to share thoughts on rebuilding and healing, and then to provide resources. So processing trauma. When I say this event, I mean the protests, and I mean the police response to the protests, and I mean the violence that surrounded that. The looting and the injustice and the racism that's happening during these events and that resulted in these events. There's also community violence, historical trauma, the exposure to secondhand trauma, such as seeing community members mistreated violently, oftentimes at the hands of police, systematic trauma. To talk about the disempowerment of incarceration, how that just takes people's power away. How do we process things like that? It's through implementing restorative justice practices, developing community spaces where people can feel free to be around and to build relationships with people, youth development initiatives, actual justice, arts, and of course, discussion.
Processing trauma. How has long-term community-wide trauma affected us? So when you think about this, the things that's going on with the communities, with the police brutalities and the disadvantages that a lot of communities have, how do you process, or how do you begin to process that trauma with these events with such violence that goes on in the low-income communities? The first, some of the things that you could do is reach out for help to cope with the trauma that has affected you in your community. So don't sit in silence and let the anger and stuff build up. Reach out for help amongst therapy, the people in your neighborhood. Examples include engaging in some type of therapy, starting or joining a community support group. So if there's no support groups in your community, hey, be the first advocate to start one. Participate in community events such as voting. Your voice do matter. You might think it doesn't, but your voice matter for you to get up and change the things that's going on into your community. In order to process the trauma, it must first be looked at and not just pushed up under the rug. Trauma must be addressed in order for people to be able to process it and for the healing. So you can't just not deal with it. You have to look at it, look at everything that's surrounding the trauma so you can be able to effectively to deal with it. Processing trauma. What emotions have people been feeling historically and due to these events? How do we process it? Talk with your family members, friends about the life events that's happened surrounding these traumas. Try to limit or re-expose yourself to the trauma by reducing media coverage, because you know, being on Facebook, watching the news a lot, that can re-expose you to your trauma with all the news coverages and the hype of it on the social media. Negative talk surrounding the issue. Try to focus on positive things. You cannot always surround yourself by negative talk. The blaming yourself for others around the trauma. put that to ease, that you can't continue to blame yourself or others for things that's happened. Adding positive actions versus negative actions. So when you have something that happened, how do you deal with it? Because you want to have a positive behavior versus a negative, because a negative behavior can set you back. So how can I deal with this positively? Start showing gratitude towards yourself in the community that you live in and work in. So the things that can happen that you see that has happened now with the rioting and the protests, how can you show gratitude towards yourself in your community? Thanks.
So processing trauma with children, don't be afraid to actually have those conversations with your kids, and different families have different things that they need to talk about. But it's important to talk about showing respect to people. And what's especially important is to model that respect with your actions. Actions speak louder than words. And so if you want your children to act a certain way towards people or to understand certain things, the way to go about that is by showing them that you do that yourself. So some steps that can be taken is to explain what's happening in age-appropriate language, being available for emotional support if the child is confused or scared or concerned about what's going on. Stick to routine as much as possible. That's always important, just to keep things going and to help people feel in control. Avoid, like Takesha said, avoid blaming or minimizing language. So you don't want to say, it's not a big deal what's happening, or I don't know why people are doing this. You want to actually address the issues, address what's happening using age-appropriate language. And you want to explain that these are important things that are happening. It's not just nothing. And then use supportive problem-solving language. Some other things to help process with children is to keep children active. Reflective activities can help with anxiety and with processing. So in addition to being physically active, by letting kids play if they're able to be outside, starting a journal or drawing or doing some other kind of writing, centering exercises, right? So that's breathing, that's focusing on your body parts, feeling your feet, feeling your knees, feeling your breath come through, counting, validating feelings, letting people feel or letting the children feel how they feel and working through that, acknowledging that those feelings are there. Engaging in activities which your kids like. That's just fun things to do. Keep in mind that any of these activities, they are not specific to children. They're things that adults can do as well to help process trauma or just to help deal with life on a daily basis. So in order to address injustice, it has to be acknowledged and it has to be talked about. Allies play a really important role in this by talking to others, using privilege to educate those who don't, and by taking action. Addressing injustice also means understanding historical and systemic roots of discrimination, racism, and equality. And it means acknowledging also an ongoing trauma on a community level as a result of these historical systems. So we have a list of resources because a lot of pharmacies in particular, but also grocery stores are closed as they rebuild. These are some places that we know are open or how you can access medications. The DCAM pharmacy at the University of Chicago is open and they're doing free delivery. Additionally, the Walgreens listed below on 79th and Pulaski, 30th and Halstead, 71st and Jeffrey, and 47th and Western are open. The Walgreens store locator is up to date with stores as they open. The Walmart on 109th is open. The CVS on 31st and Halsted is open, and also CVS does free deliveries at cvs.com. Walgreens is doing free deliveries as well. They'll do free deliveries within 5 miles of the particular pharmacy, if that one's open, or free FedEx, but that arrives in 2 to 7 days. And then for any of the deliveries, there are limits on what can be delivered. So no controlled substances, oftentimes no refrigerated medicines, but it's worth asking to see. CVS is also offering free delivery for most of its pharmacies. And you can transfer your prescription from a closed store to an open store. The same thing with controlled substances or other exists with CVS. And then there's also Vital RX Pharmacy. It is a Chicago pharmacy. And you can go to vitalrxpharmacy.com for more information there on getting your prescriptions sent there. Takesha, you want to take food?
Resource food. CPS, as you know, the first day, June 1st, CPS was closed, but now it's back open to providing meals to school children. The grocery stores and pharmacies are currently open. Hours may be reduced. So you have Save a Lot on 73rd and Stony Island, and also 2858 East 83rd. The local mart, Jeffrey Plaza, is open. The Jewels and the Walgreens at 79th and Pulaski, Jewels at 79th and Cicero, Fairpay location 4640 South Halsted, and on 2323 West 111th Street. Walmart 10900 South Doty Avenue, Fairplay. These are some of the these are some of the places. Fairpay location 4600 South Halsted and 23 West. Walmart, again, 1000 Doty Avenue, right off the 111 exit on the Bishop Ave Ford. First Choice, 3019 East 91st Street. Mariano, 1615 South Clark. Hyman's Ace Hardware, 8614 South Commercial Avenue, in Elta, Ace Hardware, 5240 South Lake Park. So these are some of the places that you can go to get things that you need. Food resources. Also, the Greater Chicago Food Depository is always an option. Call ahead before you go on. Brave Space Alliance is continue their food delivery program for the LGBTQ individuals of color. The Chicago Family Parent Program is also offering food related aid.
We'll put the link to these programs in the video description. So other resources, just a brief review of some legal and economic resources. Landlords can now start filing for evictions. And so there are a lot of people still not working, and that might not be something that, rent might not be something that many people can pay right now. So if you can't pay, we really suggest contacting your landlord to see what kind of deal they're willing to make. Just remember that whatever agreement you do get it in writing. Don't just go by someone's word. There are tenants associations. You can use 311 as a resource for information, and sometimes they can connect you to services in order to stay in your place. There's the Chicago Rents Right hotline at the number below, so that's 312-742-RENT. And then there's Illinois Legal Aid Online. Okay, on to rebuilding. How do we rebuild? Takesha.
So one of the things that's going on in the community, how do you, first you think about how do I rebuild? The first things we can start off doing is checking in with our friends, families, and neighbors and loved ones to see how you could be of service to them. as you know, a lot of the elderly people are having a much harder time getting to grocery stores, or even people without cars. So if you have a car, let's check in with them to see how they're doing, if they need anything. Plan or attend community meetings. Those are very important. Once again, your voice do matter. So by going to these meetings and planning them, attending them, your voice do matter to get your concerns out there and heard. Meet with your local alderman. If you do not know who your alderman is, we will put the link up on the resource page so you can be able to find out who your alderman is in your area. Donate to local business. I understand that not all the time that people have money. You don't have to have money to donate. You can donate your time by helping some of these businesses that's willing to reopen back up in the communities. Help them clean up, stock shelves, things like that, to rebuild your community. Share resources with other communities that you have. So you might have some type of resources that another community might not be aware of. Let's share those so we can get our communities rebuilt. Be an advocate for the people in your community. Be the voice. If you have great ideas and you want to change things, be that voice for your community. These are how we can start off to rebuild back our communities.
So what is your role in all of this, dear listener? There are so many roles. Volunteer. You can volunteer with a community organization, with a community center. You can help clean up, help educate people. Buy. That's fun for a lot of people who have the means. When you buy, solicit Black-owned businesses. Read books on historical trauma, on racism, on incarceration, just on the history of this country. Advocate, like Takesha said, for policy change or for representation. Donate. Organizations cannot get the work done without your help. And then the most important, which Takesha already talked about, vote. Make sure your voice is heard and make sure you get your vote out there. So we, in the video description, we'll actually put a link to many of these places, so places you can volunteer or donate, suggested reading, policy suggestions, and links to Black-owned businesses. Here are some of the resources that we used, and we both thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.